Hello everyone, in today's video we are going to discuss how to play the Queen's Gambit decline with the black pieces. It is a very interesting opening, especially if you do not want to play the Nimzo-Indian against 3 knight c3. Nimzo is an opening that is played like from the centuries, but it contains a huge amount of theory. So if you do not want to play the Nimzo, this particular video is the best for you. It contains no theory and just structure based position and a very interesting way to play. So I don't want to waste any further time. This video is going to be especially very interesting for all those who are looking for a weapon against 1d4. So I don't want to waste any further time, so let's quickly jump into the video. So our opponent with the white pieces starts with 1d4 and we with the black pieces replies with knight to f6, c4, and we play the move e6. And here after e6 there are mainly two ways for white to continue the position. One is knight to f3 followed by knight c3, or after knight f3 white can play the g3, the Catalan opening, or after e6 white can play the move knight to c3, which is nowadays becoming very popular. After knight c3, the most common way to play is to play the move bishop to b4, which is also known as the Nimzo-Indian Defense. And it also contains huge amount of theory. There are many variations to consider, which is a3, bishop g2, e3, f3, knight f3, queen c2, queen b3, and many more. So yeah, so I'm pretty sure that many of the players do not like to play with the theory. So at the place of playing the move bishop b4, I'm recommending you guys to play the move d5 in this position. And after d5, what's the point of playing this move d5? And what is the idea that many of the players are playing the move bishop b4 at the place of d5? After d5, white usually captures the pawn on d5, e into d5, and now plays the move bishop to g5, pinning up the knight. And now the idea is to capture the knight on the next move, so that after queen d5, queen f6, white can happily capture the d5 pawn. So here after bishop to g5, we play the move c6, protecting the pawn on d5. And after c6, here black's idea is usually to develop the bishop on f5. But here, to stop this idea, white first develops the queen to c2, which actually makes pretty much a huge sense. This is also known as the Queen's Gambit decline, the semi-slab defense. After queen c2, what's happening in this position? So first of all, white is having 2 pawns on the queen side, whereas black is having 3 pawns on the queen side. So white's idea usually is to play on the queen side, basically by pushing up these pawns, basically just trading 2 of the pawns, so that black would be remaining with only 1 pawn. That could be a weakness in the long term. So after queen c2, what we are going to play in this position? First of all, there are many ways for black to continue the position. You can play the move bishop e7. So first of all, if I just give you another variation to play, I have already made a video on it, which is after queen c2 you can play the move bishop to e7, e3, short castle, bishop to d3, h6, bishop h4, rook to e8, knight to e2, knight to d7, short castle, and you can play the move knight to e4. The point is, after bishop takes, you want to play the move knight f6, bishop to f5, bishop to h7, and you can just move the knight from here now, because the knight on f6 is defending the bishop. So that's the whole idea. It's also a very interesting way to play. But in today's video, after queen c2, I'm recommending you guys to play the move knight to a6. And at the first glance, it looks like a weird move, complete weird move. What is the knight doing on a6? After knight a6, there are 2 ideas for us. First, we can play the move knight b4, and the second idea is to play the move knight c7, which is the standard idea. I'm pretty sure that many of the players you are going to face have never seen this position, even once. After knight a6, I've taken 2 moves into consideration, which is e3, attacking the knight, which makes sense, and second, the move a3, trying to stop the move knight to b4. Let's discuss one by one. I've not taken the move e4 because it's already a bad move, because after e4, you can already play the move knight to b4, hitting the queen. And once the queen moves, you can already happily capture the pawn. And after pawn takes, let's for example takes knight into pawn, you can already play the move queen f5, a very deadly attack on this diagonal. And for example, like bishop to d2, I can play the move bishop to f5. The queen is defending the bishop, and the knight is attacking the knight on e4, and black is already completely winning in this position. That's the reason e4 is already a bad move, so I want to discard it. So after knight to a6, first let's try to discuss what happens if white plays the move e3. It makes sense because the bishop simply attacks the knight. So after e3, what is our opponent thinking here is, we can't play the move knight b4 because knight b4 doesn't make any sense. But after e3, we are going to play the move knight to b4. And here again I have taken two moves into consideration, which is queen to b1 and queen to d2. First, if white plays the move queen to b1, we are going to play the move g6. After g6, our idea is pretty much well known. We want to play the move bishop to f5, attacking the queen. So for example, a move like a3. Now we are going to play the move bishop to f5. Now the queen cannot move because knight c2 is a deadly threat. So after bishop f5, white is having the only move, which is to play the move e4. And after e4, it somehow, you can pause the video and try to find what is happening in this position. At the first glance, it looks like black is completely losing because black's two pieces are under attack. So after e4, bishop takes is the only move, and you must play it, attacking the queen. So knight takes the bishop, and we take the knight. And here, there are two ways again for white to continue the position, which is a into b4, simply capturing the knight, or first playing the move bishop into f6. First, what happens if a into b4? After a into b4, we capture the pawn on b4 with a check. So if king d1, white simply allows queen d4, which is a winning position for black. So king e2 is a forced move, but still it's completely winning for black after queen into d4, capturing the pawn again. And now the threat is to simply, there could be some threats like queen to d2, checkmate, if white plays the move bishop into f6. So after queen to d4, let's say queen c2 trying to cover the d2 square. Now we can simply long castle. And what's the main issue in this position, despite white being a piece up, I would say, like a piece up, complete piece up? What's the main issue? The main issues are the king side pieces are never going to get developed because the king is extremely weak. For example, after long castle, how can white even try to continue this position? For example, let's take the move like rook d1. After rook d1, I can play the move queen e5, which is the only move, attacking the bishop. And again, the bishop is attacked, so if you try to capture the knight, I can happily capture this piece. And again, the question remains the same. How are you going to continue the position? If you play a move like knight h3, I can play the move rook to d3, which is a very strong move. Or even I can play a move like simple move like queen to e5. The idea could be to play the move f5, f4. Or even rook d3, which is extremely strong. The point is after rook d3, e3 check, queen d3, simply getting another piece into the game. And after king here, I can simply play the move rook d8 and threatening to capture the queen, or simply queen into b2, which leads to 6 movement. So this is what happens exactly if your opponent plays the move rook d1, and there are no good ways for white to continue the position. If white plays something like bishop e3, attacking the queen simply drops back f3, and now we can simply bring all the pieces into the game, and there is no way white can develop his king side pieces. So basically it's already 0-1. So this is exactly what happens if your opponent plays the move a into b4. So what happens if your opponent plays the move bishop into f6, first capturing the knight, takes, and now playing the move queen into e4 check. And it looks like now it should be winning for white, because here we are going to play the move king to d8, and here white can simply capture the knight in this position. After pawn takes knight, we can simply capture the pawn with a check. King e2 is simply losing because of rook e8. So king to d1 is a forced move, but now comes the move rook to e8, attacking the queen. And the good thing is, if the queen moves, now we are having the move rook to e1 check, followed by simply capturing the rook, and black is completely winning this position already. And this position and this trick can't be solved. You must move the queen, and I'm going to play the move rook e1, and just game over for white. So this is exactly what happens if your opponent plays the move bishop into f6 in this position. So after bishop into queen into pawn, king to d8, at the place of capturing the knight, if white plays the move like a knight f3, a simple move. Now we can simply come back with the knight, bishop c4, and now queen e7, forcing a queen trade. Queen takes, King takes, bishop takes, pawn takes. King d2, bishop g7. And the position is roundabout even, I would say. But I would say both the sides must be having slight chances. But the pawn on d4 is a bit weak because we are having a dark square bishop. So both the squares are having their own advantages to continue the position, but it's a completely dry position and it's an equal position. So this is exactly what happens if your opponent plays the move knight f3. Now going back, what happens if your opponent plays the move queen to d2? After queen to d2, we play the move bishop to f5 because now the f5 square is no longer controlled by the queen. And after bishop f5, my idea is still the same of playing the move knight to c2. So white must play the move rook to c1, trying to stop the move knight c2. And here I can play the move a5, which is very important and very interesting. After a5, white wants to play the move a3, somehow get rid of this knight. We play the move knight a6. The good part about the pawn on a5 here is we stop the pawns on b2 and a3 on the tracks and not allowing white to push his pawns because now we can happily capture the pawns. So a5 pawn is very important in these types of position. So after knight to a6, black's overall development is completed, I would say. Now black can happily play this position, followed by bishop to e7, short castle, knight c7, knight to e6, attacking the bishop. And black has developed all his pieces, no worry in the opening phase, and you can happily play this position. It's an equal position. So this is exactly what happens if your opponent plays the move e3. So now going back, what happens if your opponent plays the move a3, which is the main move? After a3, trying to cover the b4 square, we play the move knight to c7. And now what are the ideas of playing the move knight a6? Knight c7, e3, we play the move knight e6, attacking the bishop. If bishop captures the knight, we are way happy in this position to play with the bishop pair. Our queen is developed, and black is already having a better position. So the main move is to play the move bishop h4, keeping the bishop, and now we play the move bishop e7, bishop d3. So the point here is, if we try to do a short castle, white wants to capture the bishop, white wants to capture the knight, for example, after short castle. Now white wants to capture the knight, bishop takes and capture the pawn on h7. That's the idea. So that's the reason we first play the move g6. After g6, knight to e2, short castle, and white plays the move f3. Or white can even go for the move a5, though it doesn't really matter. f3. So why f3? So basically that's the whole idea of whites in these types of position from the start, when the white captured the pawn on d5 and started out the game with knight c3. The idea is to play the move f3, develop the knight to e2, and go for a e4 break in the future. So after f3, we play the move a5. We can play the move a5, b5, it doesn't really matter because eventually we are going to have this position with b5. So if white would have castled earlier, we would have still played the move a5, f3, and b5. It is just a transposition. So after b5, now white plays, I have taken two moves into consideration, which is first to play the move rook b1, going with the idea of b4, and second is to play the move rook to e1. So first, let's try to discuss what happens after rook to b1. After rook b1, we are going to first play the move bishop to d7. Now what's the idea of bishop d7? After bishop d7, my idea is to simply protect the pawn on c6. Because once the knight on c3 moves, my c6 pawn would be under attack. And already the c6 pawn is a backward pawn because of the pawn on d4. So it's a good idea to protect the pawn and also develop the bishop. Bishop d7 and here b4. We capture the pawn, open up a rook. And in this position, we are going to play the move, very interesting move, which is knight to e8. After knight e8, what's the idea? After knight e8, if white captures the bishop, we capture the bishop back. And here, black's idea is already very interesting. Black wants to play the move knight c7, knight to a6, putting pressure on the b4 pawn. And the knight, which is on the 8th rank, goes to d6, followed by the c4. The most optimum square for the knight. And black is perfectly placed in this position. So this is the exact idea black is aiming for. So now going back, if white plays the move bishop g3, denying the bishop trade. Now, the idea still remains the same. Knight c7, followed by knight a6, knight d6, knight c4, and still black is having a full-on better position because there is no way white can hold the pawn on b4 because there is no single pawn on a3 or c3 to defend the b4 pawn. Whereas our b5 pawn and the d5 pawn is already protected by the c6 pawn, and the c6 pawn is defended by the bishop on d7. So black is having overall a good position. So this is exactly what happens if your opponent plays the move rook to b1. Now going back, what happens if your opponent plays the move rook e1? Which makes sense, white wants to create some chances with e4. After rook to e1, we are going to play the move rook to e8. First, developing our rook, putting the rook on an open file. Guys, you must remember, white can't really push this pawn easily because many times we have d4, and after something like, let's take fe4, we can happily play the move knight to g4 in this position, which is winning for black because here knight to e3 is a big threat. So these are some deadly threats that come into the position. For example, after bishop takes, we capture with the rook, and now our idea is already to capture the pawn on d4 and also threatening knight to e3, attacking the rook and the queen. So that's the reason pushing e4 pawn is not an easy task. So after rook to e8, white prepares it by playing the move bishop to f2. After bishop f2, we still play the move bishop a6. Keep focusing on our development. After bishop a6, our idea could be to play the move b4 in the future, attacking the knight and trying to trade off the bishop. e4, finally trying to push the pawn. After e4, what's happening? What's the idea of white? After e4, white can either capture the pawn or white can either push the pawn. If white captures the pawn, for example, we play the move queen b6. If white captures the pawn, we can happily capture the pawn back, and white is the one having the weakness on the d4 pawn. And now we can happily play the move rook c8 and followed by b4, and black is already having a better position. So if white tries to push this pawn, that should be the main idea. And here we are already going to play the move knight h5, trying to stop the move f4. So after knight h5, our idea is also to put the knight to f4, trying to capture the bishop, followed by b4, which is going to be extremely strong for black. So white stops it by playing the move g3, trying to cover the f4 square, but this time simply b4. And after b4, bishop into a6, pawn into, bishop goes back, and we can happily capture the pawn, and we are pawn up, having a strong pawn on the b2, followed by rook b8, and black is already better. So this is what happens if bishop into a6. So white must play the move knight a4, attacking the queen first. We can capture the bishop. White is forced to capture the bishop. We can play the move queen a6, and we have a queen trade, pawn checks, b3, and we have this particular position. So what's happening in this position, and how should we try to continue this position? After b3, we can continue the position via knight g7. White plays the move f4, which kind of looks a very natural move to me. After f4, we can already continue the move via f6. So how can white try to continue the position? For example, let's say white plays the move like rook a1. After rook a1, we are already going to capture this pawn. And after, like, white is having two options to capture the pawn. If f into e5, we can happily play the move knight g5, putting our knight to e4 at the optimum square, followed by putting this knight to e6, putting the pressure on the pawn on d4, and black is already better. So it's a bad idea. So white must capture with the d pawn. And after, if white captures with the d pawn, we can already play the move c5, trying to generate our pawn storm on the queen side. And we are just 3 squares away, I would say, from being a queen. And c4 is a very deadly move coming up, followed by rook c8. And black is very comfortable because white can't really push his pawns on the king side, because black's pawn are optimally placed to stop these pawns on the king side. So we are the one on the driver's seat having a better position. So yeah, that's it for today. I hope that this video might have helped you way much to improve your chess. We have mostly covered everything under the Queen's Gambit decline, and now you are fully fledged to play the move d5 in this position, with the most interesting idea of playing the move knight to a6, because many of the players are not aware of this idea. So yeah, if you learned anything new in today's video, then make sure to like the video, Share this video with everyone and make sure to subscribe to our channel if you are new to our channel. It's free for you, but it helps us to motivate to make videos like this. So you can just tell me in the comment box below what type of video you want next, and I'm going to come up with that particular video on. So I'm going to see you soon. So till then, stay tuned and keep watching Oneshot Chess.